Here's what's going to happen, Jonathan continued, and Elena could hear decades of controlled fury finally finding its voice. Tomorrow morning, at precisely 9 a.m., I will complete the acquisition of this hotel chain. At 9:05, I will review the employee files of everyone who witnessed tonight's events. At 9:10, I will make some very important decisions about the future of this establishment. He looked directly at David, and his next words were spoken with the quiet authority of a man who had never needed to raise his voice to be heard. You should probably start updating your resume, Mr. Hartley. Ready for the complete story? Smash that subscribe button and tell me where you are tuning in from in the comments. Tomorrow brings another mind-blowing story that's just as unbelievable. Trust me, you will want to be here for it. Alright, let's jump into it. The elevator's soft chime echoed through the marble lobby of the Grand Meridian Hotel as Jonathan Pierce stepped out, his tailored charcoal suit impeccable despite the 12-hour flight from Tokyo. At 6'2" with salt and pepper temples and intelligent dark eyes, he commanded attention wherever he went, though not always for the reasons he preferred. Jonathan paused, adjusting his platinum cufflinks while scanning the opulent surroundings. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over guests in evening wear, their laughter mixing with the gentle clink of champagne glasses from the lobby bar. This was exactly the kind of establishment his company, Pierce Hospitality Group, had built its reputation on: luxury with soul, service with genuine warmth. His phone buzzed. A text from his assistant. Board meeting moved to 9 a.m. Contract signing at the penthouse suite confirmed for tomorrow. Rest well, Mr. Pierce. Tomorrow would change everything. After 18 months of negotiations, he was finally acquiring this historic hotel chain. 12 properties across 3 countries, including this flagship location. It should have been a moment of pure triumph, the culmination of building his empire from a single boutique hotel his grandmother left him 23 years ago. Instead, exhaustion settled into his bones like lead. Success tasted different when you had no one to share it with. His ex-wife Claire's words from their divorce 3 years ago still echoed. You built an empire, Jonathan, but you forgot to build a life. He approached the concierge desk, where a young woman with kind eyes and auburn hair pulled back in an elegant chignon looked up from her computer. Her name tag read, Elena Vasquez, Guest Relations. Good evening, mister, she began with a warm smile. Pierce. Jonathan Pierce. I have a reservation in the penthouse suite. Elena's fingers flew across the keyboard, her brow furrowing slightly. I'm so sorry, Mr. Pierce, but I'm not seeing your reservation in our system. Could you possibly have the confirmation number? Before Jonathan could respond, a sharp voice cut through their conversation. Elena, step away from the desk. David Hartley, the hotel's general manager, materialized beside them, a thin man in his 50s with calculating gray eyes and a smile that never reached them. Jonathan had seen his type countless times, the kind of man who measured worth by appearance and assumption. I'll handle this, David continued, his gaze sweeping over Jonathan with barely concealed disdain. The assessment was swift and damning. He saw an expensive suit but missed the quiet confidence, noticed the race but ignored the refinement. Sir, I'm going to need to see multiple forms of identification and a credit card before we can proceed, David announced loudly enough for nearby guests to turn and stare. The penthouse suite is reserved for our most distinguished clientele. Elena's cheeks flushed. Mr. Hartley, I was just checking. Elena, please attend to other guests. I said I'll handle this. The lobby seemed to hold its breath. Jonathan felt the familiar tightness in his chest, the same feeling from boarding school when teachers assumed he was there on charity, from business meetings where potential partners expected him to be the assistant rather than the CEO, from restaurants where he was asked if he was sure he could afford the wine list. But tonight felt different. Tonight, The weight of 38 years of these moments pressed down on him like a physical force. "Of course," Jonathan said quietly, his voice steady despite the storm brewing inside. He reached for his wallet with deliberate calm. "Though I'm curious, what exactly qualifies someone as distinguished in your establishment?" David's smile turned predatory. "I think you know what I mean, sir. We maintain certain standards here. Perhaps you'd be more comfortable at one of the hotels downtown. I'd be happy to call you a cab." The words hung in the air like poison. Around them, conversations had stopped entirely. A well-dressed elderly couple near the bar shook their heads in disapproval. Whether at David's behavior or Jonathan's presence was unclear. Elena looked mortified, her hands trembling slightly as she gripped her pen. "Mr. Hartley, please, I think there's been a misunder." "Elena, that's quite enough." David's voice carried a warning that made the young woman step back as if slapped. Jonathan's jaw tightened imperceptibly, but his voice remained level. "I see. And this assessment of my suitability, is this standard protocol for all your guests?" "For guests who belong here, sir, such measures aren't necessary." The cruelty was casual, practiced. How many others had stood in this very spot, facing the same humiliation? How many had simply turned and left, dignity bruised but unwilling to make a scene? Jonathan Pierce had built an empire by reading people, by understanding the intricate dance of power and perception. He recognized David Hartley's type perfectly, the middle manager drunk on borrowed authority, wielding discrimination like a weapon because it was the only power he truly held. What David didn't know, what none of them knew, was that in 18 hours, Jonathan would own not just this hotel, but David's career, Elena's future, and the very ground they stood on. The thought should have brought satisfaction. Instead, it brought only a deep, familiar weariness. "You know what?" Jonathan said softly, sliding his wallet back into his jacket. "You're absolutely right. I don't belong here." He turned toward the exit, each step measured and deliberate. Behind him, he heard Elena's sharp intake of breath and David's satisfied chuckle. But as he reached the revolving door, something made him pause. Maybe it was the way Elena had tried to help, or the memory of his grandmother's voice. "Baby, you don't run from fights that matter. You just make sure you win them right." He turned back, his dark eyes finding David's across the marble expanse. "See you tomorrow, Mr. Hartley." The words were quiet, almost conversational, but something in Jonathan's tone made David's smug expression falter just slightly. Then Jonathan Pierce walked out into the night, leaving behind a lobby full of witnesses and a man who had just made the most expensive mistake of his career. The cool night air hit Jonathan's face like a slap of reality as he stood outside the Grand Meridian's gleaming entrance. Valets in crisp uniforms pretended not to notice him, their eyes sliding past as if he were invisible. The irony wasn't lost on him. In 12 hours, he'd technically be their boss. He pulled out his phone to call his driver, but his hands were trembling slightly. Damn it. Even after all these years, after all his success, moments like these still got under his skin like shrapnel. "Excuse me, sir?" Jonathan turned to find Elena hurrying toward him, her heels clicking against the marble steps. She'd grabbed a coat, but hadn't bothered to button it, her breath forming small clouds in the October air. "Miss Vasquez. Elena Vasquez." She stopped a few feet away, wrapping her arms around herself. I wanted to apologize. What happened in there was completely unacceptable." Jonathan studied her face in the amber glow of the street lamps. Her cheeks were flushed from more than just the cold. There was genuine distress in her dark eyes, a kind of moral outrage that seemed to radiate from her small frame. "You don't need to apologize for your manager's behavior, Miss Vasquez." "But I do." Her voice carried a slight accent, something musical that suggested childhood summers somewhere warmer. "I've worked in hospitality for 8 years, and I've never—" She shook her head, clearly struggling with words. "That's not who we are." That's not who I am. Something in her voice made Jonathan take a step closer. How long have you worked here? 3 years. I started as a night clerk and worked my way up. She met his eyes directly, unflinching. My grandmother cleaned hotel rooms for 40 years. She taught me that every guest deserves dignity regardless of— Elena stopped herself, coloring slightly. Regardless of what they look like. Regardless of anything. Her jaw set with quiet determination. Mr. Pierce, I pulled your reservation after you left. It's in the system. Penthouse suite, confirmed 3 weeks ago. Payment authorization from Pierce Hospitality Group. She paused. Pierce Hospitality Group, you're not just a guest, are you? Jonathan felt something shift in his chest, a crack in the armor he'd been wearing all evening. Here was someone who'd done what David Hartley couldn't be bothered to do, her job. Simple human decency shouldn't feel revolutionary, but tonight it did. Why did you come out here, Elena? She was quiet for a long moment, her breath forming small clouds between them. When she spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. Because 3 years ago, my brother Miguel was killed by a drunk driver coming home from his job at a restaurant downtown. He was a cook, a good one. Worked double shifts to help pay for my college. Her eyes glistened, but her voice remained steady. At the hospital, we sat in the waiting room for 6 hours. Miguel was dying, and we couldn't afford the private rooms, so we waited with everyone else, families who looked like us, who were scared like us. Jonathan found himself holding his breath. A man in an expensive suit came in around midnight. His son had been in an accident too. The staff immediately ushered him to a private consultation room, brought him coffee, treated him like— She gestured toward the hotel behind them. Like he mattered more than the rest of us. Like his pain was more important because of his clothes, his skin color, his address. She wiped at her eyes with the back of her hand. Miguel died while I was watching that man get the dignity that my family was denied. And tonight, watching Mr. Hartley treat you that way, it brought it all back. The words hung between them like a bridge neither had expected to find. Jonathan felt something unfamiliar stirring in his chest, not just anger at injustice, but a deeper recognition. This woman understood something that most people in his world didn't, that dignity wasn't a luxury item, that respect wasn't earned through net worth. I'm sorry about your brother, he said quietly. He would have liked you, Elena said with a sad smile. Miguel always said you could tell everything about a person by how they treated service workers. You were kind to me even when you had every right to be angry. And now, she looked up at him, and Jonathan saw something in her eyes he hadn't expected. Not pity, not professional courtesy, but genuine warmth. Recognition. Now I'm wondering if you'd let me buy you coffee and help you find another hotel for tonight. I know this city, and I know places that will treat you the way every guest deserves to be treated. The offer was simple, but it landed in Jonathan's chest like a small explosion. When was the last time someone had offered to help him? Not because of what he could do for them, not because of his wealth or connections, but simply because it was the right thing to do. Elena, he said carefully, you should know something. Tomorrow morning I'm— Mr. Pierce? A familiar voice cut through the night air. Mr. Pierce, is that you? They turned to see David Hartley approaching, his earlier confidence replaced by something that looked suspiciously like panic. Behind him trailed 2 security guards and what appeared to be the hotel's night manager. Elena, get back inside immediately, David snapped, his eyes darting between them nervously. I should have known you'd be out here causing more trouble. I'm not causing trouble, Mr. Hartley. I'm trying to fix it. There's nothing to fix. I handled the situation appropriately. But David's voice carried a tremor now, and Jonathan recognized the sound of a man whose certainty was crumbling. What changed your mind, Hartley? Jonathan asked softly. David's Adam's apple bobbed. We ran a more thorough check of our reservation system. There seems to have been a technical glitch. Your suite is ready, of course. Our finest accommodations, complimentary champagne, anything you need. Jonathan looked at Elena, who was watching the exchange with growing understanding. Her eyes widened slightly as the pieces fell into place. "Ah," Jonathan said, his voice deceptively calm. "And what exactly did this thorough check reveal?" David's face had gone pale. "Mr. Pierce, if we could perhaps discuss this privately." "No." The word cut through the night air like a blade. "You made your assessment of my worth very publicly. I think the least you can do is explain your change of heart the same way." The security guards shifted uncomfortably. Elena stood perfectly still, but Jonathan could see her mind racing. "Pierce Hospitality Group," she said quietly, more to herself than to them. "You're not just staying here. He's the one buying the hotel chain," David finished miserably. "The acquisition finalizes tomorrow morning." The silence that followed was deafening. In the distance, traffic hummed and the city breathed, but in their small circle on the hotel steps, the world had stopped. Elena turned to look at Jonathan with new eyes, not judgment, but a kind of awed understanding. Here was a man who could have destroyed David Hartley with a single phone call, who could have made the discrimination disappear with a flash of his corporate credentials. Instead, he'd chosen to walk away with quiet dignity. "So let me understand this correctly," Jonathan said, his voice carrying the weight of every slight, every assumption, every moment of casual cruelty he'd ever endured. "When you thought I was just another black man trying to access services I couldn't afford, I wasn't worthy of basic courtesy. But now that you know I'm about to become your boss, suddenly I deserve champagne and apologies." David opened his mouth, but no words came. "Here's what's going to happen," Jonathan continued, and Elena could hear decades of controlled fury finally finding its voice. "Tomorrow morning, at precisely 9 a.m., I will complete the acquisition of this hotel chain. At 9:05, I will review the employee files of everyone who witnessed tonight's events. At 9:10, I will make some very important decisions about the future of this establishment." He looked directly at David, and his next words were spoken with the quiet authority of a man who had never needed to raise his voice to be heard. "You should probably start updating your resume, Mr. Hartley." Elena felt her breath catch. This wasn't just about one night's discrimination. This was about justice, swift and certain. But then Jonathan did something unexpected. He turned to Elena, and his expression softened completely. "Miss Vasquez, would you still be interested in that coffee? I think I'd like to hear more about your brother, and about what kind of place you think this hotel could become." Elena stood frozen between two worlds. The gleaming hotel behind her where her paycheck and her carefully built career waited, and the enigmatic man in front of her who'd just turned her understanding of power and justice completely upside down. She began, then stopped, her eyes darting between Jonathan and David's increasingly panicked expression. "Elena," David's voice carried a warning sharp as broken glass, "I strongly suggest you return to your duties immediately. We have protocols about fraternizing with guests, and given tonight's irregularities, I'd hate for there to be any additional complications to your employment status." The threat hung in the air like smoke. Elena's hands trembled slightly as she clutched her coat tighter. She'd worked so hard to get here. Nights of studying hospitality management while working double shifts, months of proving herself worthy of the guest relations position, years of sending money home to help her mother pay off Miguel's medical bills. "Of course," she said quietly, taking a step back toward the hotel entrance. "Mr. Pierce, I hope you have a pleasant stay." But she didn't move. Something in Jonathan's eyes held her, not expectation or demand, but a kind of gentle understanding that made her chest tight. Jonathan studied her face, reading the conflict written there. He recognized the fear. He'd seen it in his own mirror countless times during his early career, when speaking up meant risking everything you'd worked for. "It's all right, Elena," he said softly. "Mr. Hartley is right about protocols. The words should have been a relief, but instead they felt like a small death. Elena nodded, turned toward the entrance, then stopped. Miguel would have gone, she whispered, so quietly only Jonathan could hear. David stepped forward, his confidence returning now that his authority was being respected. Excellent. Elena, please prepare the penthouse suite immediately. Mr. Pierce, if you'll follow me, I'll personally ensure you have everything you need. But Jonathan didn't move. He was watching Elena's shoulders, the way they'd set with resignation, the defeat in her posture that reminded him of every time he'd backed down from a fight that mattered. Actually, Mr. Hartley, I've changed my mind about staying here tonight. David's face went white. Sir, please, if there's anything. There is something. Jonathan's voice carried a new edge. I'd like you to explain to Miss Vasquez exactly why accepting my invitation for coffee would violate hotel protocols, when just an hour ago you were suggesting I'd be more comfortable at a different establishment entirely. The question landed like a physical blow. David's mouth opened and closed wordlessly. I mean, Jonathan continued conversationally, if we're discussing appropriate behavior and professional standards, I'm curious about your interpretation of equal service provisions under federal anti-discrimination laws. Elena's head snapped up, her eyes widening as she watched David crumble in real time. Furthermore, Jonathan said, pulling out his phone, I'm wondering if the hotel's corporate compliance officer is aware of tonight's events. I have quite a detailed recording from our earlier conversation. He didn't, but David didn't know that. The bluff hit its mark perfectly. Mr. Pierce, please, I think we've had a misunderstanding. No misunderstanding at all. You made your position very clear. Jonathan turned back to Elena, whose face was now flushed with something between amazement and terror. Miss Vasquez, the choice is entirely yours. But I want you to know that whatever you decide, your job security isn't in question. I give you my word on that. Elena looked between them, her mind racing. In the span of 20 minutes, her entire world had shifted. The quiet man who'd been denied basic dignity was now revealing layers of power and authority she'd never imagined. And he was offering her something no one ever had, a choice without consequences. I don't understand, she said finally. It's simple, Jonathan replied. Would you like to get coffee with me, Elena? As two people who believe in treating others with basic human decency. The question was simple, but Elena could see the complexity beneath it. This wasn't just about coffee. This was about taking a stand, about choosing what kind of person she wanted to be when the stakes were highest. What about the hotel? My shift doesn't end until... Elena can leave early tonight, David interrupted desperately. With full pay, of course. Any accommodations Mr. Pierce requires. Elena stared at her manager, this man who'd terrified her for 3 years with his arbitrary rules and casual cruelty, now scrambling to appease the guest he'd tried to humiliate. That's not necessary, Jonathan said calmly. Elena, you work here. This is your livelihood. I won't be responsible for disrupting that. But Elena was thinking about Miguel, about the hospital waiting room, about all the times she'd watched injustice happen and done nothing because the cost felt too high. You know what? She said, her voice growing stronger with each word. I think I would like that coffee. David made a small choking sound. Elena, please reconsider. Mr. Hartley, Elena said, turning to face him directly. For the first time in 3 years, she met his eyes without flinching. I'm using my break time for a coffee with a guest. Unless you're suggesting there's something inappropriate about that. The trap was elegant in its simplicity. If David objected, he'd be forced to explain why Elena couldn't have coffee with a black guest when such interactions were perfectly acceptable with white patrons. If he allowed it, he'd be acknowledging that his earlier behavior was the real violation of protocol. Jonathan watched the exchange with growing admiration. Elena Vasquez was braver than she knew. Of course not, David managed weakly. Take all the time you need. Elena nodded, then looked at Jonathan with a smile that transformed her entire face. "I know a place about 3 blocks from here. They make the best café con leche in the city. I'd like that very much." As they started walking away from the hotel, Elena felt her phone buzzing with what she knew would be panicked texts from her co-workers who'd witnessed the confrontation. But for the first time in years, she didn't care about the gossip or the speculation. "Can I ask you something?" she said as they reached the sidewalk. "Of course. Back there, when you said you'd give me your word about job security, how can you be sure? I mean, you don't even officially own the hotel yet." Jonathan was quiet for a moment, considering his answer. "Elena, I've spent 20 years building a business based on one simple principle, that everyone deserves to be treated with dignity, regardless of who they are or where they come from. Tomorrow, when I finalize this acquisition, that principle becomes policy." He paused, looking back at the hotel's glittering facade. "But tonight, I learned something I didn't expect." "What's that?" "That sometimes the people who understand dignity best are the ones who've had to fight hardest for it." Elena felt warmth spread through her chest, but also a flicker of uncertainty. This man had just revealed himself to be more powerful than she'd imagined, and she was walking through the city with him based on 20 minutes of conversation. "Mr. Pierce," she said carefully, "I need you to know, I'm not looking for any special treatment or opportunities. I just wanted to do the right thing tonight." Jonathan stopped walking and turned to face her under a street lamp. "Elena, what if I told you that doing the right thing was exactly the kind of special qualification I've been looking for?" The question hung between them as they stood on the empty sidewalk, 2 people from different worlds who'd found unexpected common ground in a moment of crisis. But Elena felt a familiar flutter of self-doubt. "You don't know me. You don't know anything about me except that I was decent to you when my manager wasn't. I know you risked your job to apologize for something that wasn't your fault," Jonathan replied. "I know you came outside in the cold because your conscience wouldn't let you stay silent. I know you chose to have coffee with me even when it might have consequences." He smiled, and Elena saw something in his expression that made her breath catch. Not the calculating look of a powerful businessman, but genuine warmth. "And I know that in 8 years of hospitality work, you've never seen anything like what happened tonight, which tells me exactly what kind of establishments you've chosen to work for." Elena felt herself relaxing despite her reservations. There was something about Jonathan Pierce that felt safe. Not safe in the way of someone who wouldn't challenge her, but safe in the way of someone who would challenge her to be better. "All right," she said, surprising herself, "but I'm buying the coffee. It's the least I can do after the night you've had." Jonathan laughed, the first genuine laugh she'd heard from him all evening. "Deal. But I'm leaving the tip." As they walked toward the cafe, Elena couldn't shake the feeling that this night was going to change everything. She just wasn't sure if that terrified her or thrilled her more. Behind them, the Grand Meridian Hotel glowed against the night sky, unaware that its future, and theirs, was being written with every step they took away from its gilded doors. The Café Luna was a tiny slice of warmth carved out of the city's concrete embrace. Mismatched chairs surrounded small wooden tables, and the walls were covered with local artwork and photographs of what Elena explained was the owner's family back in Colombia. At nearly midnight, they were the only customers besides an elderly man reading a newspaper in the corner booth. "Rosa!" Elena called out to the woman behind the counter, a silver-haired lady who looked up with tired but kind eyes. "Está bien si pedimos café?" "Para ti milla siempre," Rosa replied, then switched to accented English when she noticed Jonathan. "You bring your friend, we make the good coffee. Sit, sit." They chose a table near the window, where Elena could watch the hotel's lights glowing in the distance. The irony wasn't lost on her. She'd spent 3 years working in luxury, but this simple place felt more like home than the Grand Meridian's marble halls ever had. 2 café con leche extra foam, Elena ordered, then looked at Jonathan. Trust me? At this point, I think I have to. Rosa bustled behind the counter, humming softly while the espresso machine hissed and gurgled. The domestic sounds felt surreal after the evening's drama, like stepping from a storm into unexpected shelter. So, Elena said, settling back in her chair, Pierce Hospitality Group. Should I have known that name? Jonathan smiled ruefully. Probably not, unless you follow hospitality industry trades. We specialize in, let's call it conscious luxury. High-end service with social responsibility. Meaning we pay living wages, provide full benefits, and train our staff to see every guest as equally deserving of respect. He paused. It's not revolutionary thinking, but apparently it's rare enough to be profitable. Elena studied his face in the cafe's warm light. Away from the hotel's harsh brightness, he looked younger, less guarded. How did you get into the business? My grandmother. Jonathan's expression softened. She worked as a maid at the Fairmont in San Francisco for 30 years. Raised me after my parents died in a car accident when I was 12. I'm sorry. Don't be. Grandma Rose was formidable. She used to tell me stories about the guests she served, the ones who treated her like furniture, and the rare ones who saw her as a person. She'd say, "Baby, the way someone treats the help tells you everything about their character." Elena's breath caught. That's almost exactly what Miguel used to say. Their eyes met across the small table, and Jonathan felt that strange sensation again, the sense of recognition, of finding someone who understood without explanation. Rosa appeared with their coffee, setting down 2 ceramic mugs filled with perfectly frothed café con leche. You two look like you have big things to discuss, see? I make extra strong tonight. After she'd returned to her cleaning, Elena wrapped her hands around the warm mug. Your grandmother sounds wise. She was. When I graduated from Stanford Business School, she gave me her life savings, $12,000, and the deed to a small bed and breakfast in Napa that she'd somehow managed to buy over the years. Said it was my inheritance, but more than that, it was my responsibility. To do what? To prove that business could be different, that you could make money and still treat people right. He took a sip of coffee and smiled. This is incredible, by the way. Rosa's been making coffee since before I was born. Her husband died 5 years ago, and she keeps this place running mostly through stubbornness and the loyalty of customers who've been coming here for decades. Elena's voice carried deep affection. She helped me through some of the hardest months after Miguel died. Jonathan set down his mug. Tell me about him. Elena was quiet for a long moment, staring into her coffee. When she spoke, her voice was soft but steady. Miguel was 3 years older than me, but he always acted like my twin. When our father left, Miguel became the man of the house at 14. Worked construction on weekends, helped mom with the bills, still managed to graduate valedictorian. She smiled at the memory. He had this dream of opening his own restaurant. Used to practice recipes on me and mom until we begged for mercy. He was going to call it Elena's Place because he said I was the one who believed in his cooking first. What kind of food? Fusion. Mexican and Italian. Sounds crazy, but Miguel could make it work. He'd do these incredible things with mole and pasta, or take traditional tamales and stuff them with risotto. Elena's eyes brightened with the memory, then dimmed. He was saving money to go to culinary school. Worked double shifts at 3 different restaurants. Jonathan felt a familiar tightness in his chest. The night of the accident? Coming home from his prep job at this fancy steakhouse downtown. It was almost 2 a.m. He'd been working since 6 that morning. Elena's hands tightened around her mug. The drunk driver ran a red light going 50 in a 25 zone. Miguel never had a chance. Elena, the worst part. Her voice cracked slightly. Miguel was finally ready to apply to culinary school. He'd saved enough for the first semester, had all his paperwork ready. He was going to submit everything the next morning. Silence settled between them, heavy with the weight of dreams cut short. Outside, a taxi honked at a pedestrian, and the ordinary sounds of city life continued, indifferent to their grief. "I'm sorry doesn't feel adequate," Jonathan said finally. "No, it doesn't." Elena wiped at her eyes with her napkin. "But it helps. Miguel used to say that sorry was just the starting point. What mattered was what you did after." "Is that why you went into hospitality? To honor his memory?" Elena shook her head. "I went into hospitality because I needed a job with benefits to help pay Mom's medical bills. But I stayed because—" She paused, searching for the right words. "Because I realized it was a way to give people what Miguel never got at that hospital. Dignity. Respect. The feeling that they mattered." Jonathan leaned forward slightly. "And tonight, when David treated me the way he did? Tonight I saw Miguel in that hospital waiting room all over again. I saw my family being dismissed because we didn't look like we belonged." Elena met his eyes directly. "I couldn't let it happen again. Not on my watch." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, the weight of shared understanding settling between them like a bridge neither had expected to build. "Can I ask you something?" Elena said. "Of course. Why didn't you tell David who you were right away? Most people in your position would have pulled rank immediately." Jonathan considered the question, swirling his coffee thoughtfully. "Because the moment I flash my credentials, the discrimination doesn't go away. It just gets hidden. David would have been all smiles and apologies, but he wouldn't have learned anything. He would have just been more careful next time. And now he knows that actions have consequences. That the person you dismissed today might be the person who controls your future tomorrow." Jonathan's expression hardened slightly. More importantly, everyone who witnessed tonight learned something too. Elena felt a chill that had nothing to do with the October air seeping through the cafe's windows. "What are you going to do to him? What do you think I should do?" The question caught her off guard. That's not for me to decide." "Isn't it?" Jonathan leaned back in his chair. "You were there. You saw what happened. You know what kind of manager he is, what kind of environment he creates. If you were running that hotel, what would you do?" Elena found herself really thinking about it, not just about David's behavior tonight, but about every interaction she'd witnessed over the past 3 years. The way he spoke to the housekeeping staff, his casual dismissal of guest complaints, the subtle but persistent way he made employees feel expendable. "He shouldn't be in a position where he can treat people that way," she said finally. But I keep thinking about his family. His kids. I mean, he's terrible at his job and he's clearly prejudiced, but losing his career entirely." Elena shook her head. "Miguel would have said there's a difference between justice and revenge." Jonathan studied her face with growing admiration. Even after everything she'd witnessed, Elena's first instinct was toward compassion rather than retribution. "What if there was a middle path?" he asked. "Like what?" "Like giving someone a chance to learn from their mistakes, with clear consequences if they don't." Before Elena could respond, her phone buzzed with an urgent text. Then another, and another. She glanced at the screen, and her face went pale. "What is it?" "It's Carmen, one of the night clerks." Elena's voice was tight with worry. "David's called an emergency staff meeting for first thing tomorrow morning. He's telling everyone that there was an incident with a difficult guest, and that anyone who spoke to you or gave you information could face disciplinary action." Jonathan's jaw tightened. "He's retaliating." "He's scared," Elena corrected, but her hands were shaking as she set down her phone. "Carmen says he's specifically asking questions about who talked to you, who might have collaborated with the situation." "Elena, I told you your job was safe." "It's not about my job." Elena's voice rose slightly, then she caught herself and glanced apologetically at Rosa. "Sorry. It's not about my job, Jonathan. It's about everyone else." The housekeeping staff who smiled at you, the valet who might have opened a door, anyone who treated you like a human being instead of following David's lead. Jonathan felt anger surge through him, hot and immediate. David Hartley wasn't just a bigot. He was a coward and a bully, willing to destroy other people's livelihoods to save his own skin. How many people are we talking about? Maybe a dozen who are working tonight. People with families, with bills to pay. Elena's eyes flashed with protective fury. People who don't have the luxury of standing up to him because they can't afford to lose their jobs. Jonathan was quiet for a long moment, his businessman's mind calculating possibilities and consequences. Elena, what time does your shift officially start tomorrow? 7 a.m. Why? Because I think it's time David Hartley learned what accountability really looks like. Jonathan pulled out his phone and began scrolling through his contacts. I need to make a call. At midnight? Corporate lawyers don't keep regular hours when acquisitions are on the line. He found the number he was looking for. Marcus Chun, my chief legal counsel. If David is threatening employees for basic human decency, we need documentation before tomorrow's meeting. Elena watched as Jonathan stepped outside to make the call, his voice carrying through the cafe's thin windows in urgent, clipped tones. Through the glass, she could see him pacing, his free hand cutting through the air as he spoke. Rosa approached with a carafe of coffee. Your friend, he is important man, see? Very important, apparently. But he sits in my cafe like regular person. Drinks coffee, listens to your stories about Miguel. Rosa refilled Elena's cup thoughtfully. Important men who are also good men. Estos son raros. Rare. Elena nodded, but uncertainty was gnawing at her. In the space of 3 hours, her quiet life had been turned upside down by a stranger who wielded the kind of power she'd only read about in business magazines. She was beginning to understand that coffee with Jonathan Pierce meant stepping into a world she wasn't sure she belonged in. Jonathan returned, his expression grim. Marcus is sending someone to the hotel right now to interview tonight's staff. We'll have sworn statements by morning. Is that really necessary? Elena, David isn't just protecting himself. He's trying to create a narrative where you and the other employees were somehow at fault for treating me with basic respect. Jonathan sat back down, his coffee forgotten. If he succeeds, it won't matter that I own the hotel tomorrow. The damage will be done. Elena felt a chill of recognition. She'd seen this before, the way institutional power protected itself by sacrificing the powerless. There's something I need to tell you, she said quietly. Jonathan waited. This isn't the first time David's done something like this. Not exactly like this, but... Elena took a shaky breath. 6 months ago, we had a family stay at the hotel. Mexican-American, dressed nicely, spoke perfect English. But they had 3 kids, and the kids were being, well, kids, a little loud in the lobby. She wrapped her hands around her coffee mug for warmth. David made them wait 2 hours for their room, claiming there were complications with their reservation. Then he put them in the room right next to the ice machine, even though we had quieter rooms available. Did anyone report it? To whom? David was following protocol, technically. Nothing he did was outright illegal, just... Elena's voice trailed off. Just cruel. The mother came to me the next morning. She was crying. She said her 8-year-old daughter had asked her why the man at the front desk didn't like them, and she didn't know how to answer. Jonathan felt familiar anger building in his chest. What did you do? I upgraded them to a suite. Told David there was a plumbing issue with their original room. Elena's smile was rueful. Cost me my Employee of the Month bonus, but it was worth it to see that little girl's face when she saw the room with the separate living area. And David wrote me up for unauthorized room changes and exceeding my authority with guest relations. Elena pulled out her phone and scrolled to a photo. But look, she showed Jonathan a picture of herself with the Mexican-American family in front of the hotel. The little girl was grinning, gap-toothed and radiant, while her parents smiled with genuine warmth. They sent this to me last month. The family, I mean. They were visiting for the daughter's birthday, and they specifically requested me when they made their reservation for this year. Jonathan studied the photo, then looked at Elena with new understanding. You've been fighting this fight longer than just tonight. Not fighting, just trying to be the person Miguel raised me to be. Elena's voice was soft but determined. He used to say that you can't control how people treat you, but you can control how you treat others. Jonathan was quiet for a moment, processing this new layer of Elena's story. He'd assumed tonight was an anomaly, a moment of moral clarity in an otherwise routine job. But Elena had been quietly, persistently choosing human decency over professional safety for months. Elena, can I ask you something personal? She nodded. What do you make at the hotel? Annually, I mean. The question caught her off guard. Why does that matter? Because I'm trying to understand what you've been risking every time you've chosen to do the right thing. Elena shifted uncomfortably. 42,000. Plus benefits. Jonathan did quick mental math. After taxes, rent, and the money she sent home to help with her mother's medical bills, Elena was probably living paycheck to paycheck. Every write-up from David, every threat to her employment, wasn't just a professional inconvenience. It was a threat to her family's survival. Elena, how much do you send home to your mother each month? Jonathan, I don't think. Please. This matters. Elena hesitated, then sighed. 800. Sometimes more when Mom has doctor appointments. Nearly a quarter of her take-home pay. Jonathan felt something shift in his chest, a recognition of the quiet heroism it took to choose principle over security when security was already so fragile. What did your mother say when you told her about Miguel's dream restaurant? Elena's eyes softened. She said Miguel was a dreamer, but dreams don't pay bills. She wanted him to keep his steady job and forget about culinary school. Her voice grew quiet. They fought about it the week before he died. Mom was scared he'd lose everything chasing something that might not work out. And now she wishes she'd told him to chase every dream he had. Elena wiped at her eyes. She says the worst regret isn't failing, it's not trying. Jonathan leaned forward. Is that why you're here with me tonight? Instead of playing it safe at the hotel? Elena considered the question. Maybe. Or maybe I'm here because for the first time in 3 years, someone with real power actually listened when I said something was wrong. She looked directly at him, and Jonathan saw something in her eyes that took his breath away. Not gratitude or deference, but recognition. The look of someone who'd found an unexpected ally. Can I tell you something? She said. Of course. When I watched you walk out of that lobby tonight, when David was celebrating like he'd won something, I felt ashamed. Not for you, but for myself. Because I'd let it happen. Again. Jonathan shook his head. Elena, you didn't let anything. I did. I stood there and watched discrimination happen, and I told myself it wasn't my place to interfere. Just like at the hospital with Miguel. Just like with that family 6 months ago, until it was too late to prevent the damage. Elena's voice grew stronger. But tonight, when I saw you walking away with dignity intact even after being treated so cruelly, I realized that doing nothing wasn't protecting me. It was killing me, piece by piece. Jonathan felt something profound settle in his chest. He'd spent the evening thinking he was the one who'd been wronged, the one who needed justice or vindication. But Elena had been fighting her own battle, against complicity, against the slow erosion of conscience that came from choosing safety over principle day after day. So this isn't just about coffee, he said softly. No, this is about choosing what kind of person I want to be when it costs something to be decent. They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of mutual understanding settling between them. Outside, the city continued its restless movement, but inside the small cafe, Two people who'd been strangers 3 hours ago were discovering they'd been fighting the same battle from different sides. "Elena," Jonathan said finally, "what if I told you that tomorrow didn't have to be about punishment or revenge? What if it could be about building something better?" "I'd say that sounds like something Miguel would have believed in." Jonathan smiled, and Elena saw something in his expression that made her breath catch. Not the calculating look of a business mogul, but the warm recognition of someone who'd found a kindred spirit. "Then let me tell you what I think we should do." Rosa had dimmed the lights and was quietly cleaning behind the counter, giving them the illusion of privacy in the small cafe. Jonathan leaned forward, his voice taking on the passionate cadence of someone sharing a vision. "What if we didn't just fire David? What if we used tomorrow as a teaching moment, not just for him, but for the entire hospitality industry?" Elena raised an eyebrow. "How do you mean?" "Pierce Hospitality Group has been developing a program called Dignity First. Comprehensive anti-bias training for all levels of hotel staff, from housekeeping to management. Real accountability measures, not just corporate lip service." Jonathan's eyes brightened with enthusiasm. "The Grand Meridian could be our flagship demonstration. And David? David gets a choice. He can participate in the program, genuinely, not just going through the motions, and keep his job with strict oversight and clear consequences if he reverts. Or he can leave with a severance package and a recommendation for similar training elsewhere." Elena studied his face. "You're giving him a way out. I'm giving him a way forward. There's a difference." Jonathan paused. "My grandmother used to say that people aren't born bigots, they learn it, which means they can unlearn it if they really want to." Elena felt something warm unfurl in her chest. "That's very generous, considering what he put you through." "Elena, I've been successful for 20 years. One night of discrimination isn't going to break me. But for someone like David, losing his career entirely might just make him bitter and double down on his prejudices." Jonathan's expression grew thoughtful. "Real change happens when people choose it, not when it's forced on them." Rosa approached their table with a plate of pastries. "Perdón, but you two look like you need something sweet. These are from today, still good." "Rosa, you don't have to," Elena began. "See, I do. Important conversations need good food." She winked at Jonathan. "My husband used to say the best business happens over shared meals." After Rosa returned to her cleaning, Elena picked at one of the pastries, a delicate cookie dusted with cinnamon. "These are Miguel's favorites." "Were his favorites? Tell me more about his restaurant dream." Elena's face lit up with memory. "He had it all planned out. 24 seats, open kitchen so people could watch him cook. He wanted to call it Abuela's Table because our grandmother taught him that food wasn't just about eating, it was about bringing people together." Sounds like he understood hospitality better than most people with business degrees. Miguel understood people. He could look at someone and know exactly what they needed. Comfort food when they were sad, something adventurous when they were celebrating, simple and perfect when they just wanted to feel at home. Jonathan found himself smiling. "He sounds like someone I would have liked to meet." "He would have loved you," Elena said without hesitation. Miguel had this theory that you could tell everything about a person by watching how they treated service workers. He would have seen right through your expensive suit to the man who says please and thank you like he means it. They fell into comfortable silence, sharing the pastries and coffee while the city settled into its late-night rhythm outside. Elena found herself studying Jonathan's face in the cafe's warm light, the lines around his eyes that spoke of laughter as much as stress, the way his hands moved when he talked, gentle and expressive. "Can I ask you something personal?" she said. "After everything we've shared tonight, I think we're past formal boundaries. What happened to your marriage?" Jonathan was quiet for a moment, considering his answer. "Claire wasn't wrong when she said I'd forgotten to build a life. I was so focused on proving that I could succeed despite every obstacle, that I could build something meaningful despite every person who told me I didn't belong. I forgot about the people who already believed in me. She left because of the work? She left because I used work as a way to avoid being vulnerable. Every slight, every racist comment, every time someone assumed I was the assistant instead of the CEO, I'd channel that anger into building bigger, achieving more, proving them wrong. Jonathan's smile was rueful. But success became my armor, and after a while, Claire couldn't find the man underneath anymore. Elena felt a pang of recognition. Are you lonely? The question was simple, but it hit Jonathan like a physical blow. When was the last time someone had asked him that? When was the last time he'd been honest about the answer? Yes, he said quietly. Very. Elena reached across the table and touched his hand briefly, a gesture of comfort that felt entirely natural. Miguel used to say that being successful and being happy weren't the same thing. He said the richest person in the world was poor if they had no one to share their wealth with. Jonathan looked down at where her hand had touched his, feeling the warmth that lingered. Your brother sounds like he was wise beyond his years. He was. But he was also 26 years old and had never been on a real date because he was too busy working to support the family. Elena's voice carried a note of sadness. Sometimes I wonder if he might have been lonely too, but just better at hiding it. They sat with that thought for a moment, both recognizing the weight of dreams deferred and connections missed. Elena, Jonathan said softly, can I tell you why I really wanted to have coffee with you tonight? She nodded. It wasn't just because you stood up for me, though that meant more than I can express. It was because when you looked at me in that lobby, you saw a person. Not a successful businessman or a victim of discrimination or a potential opportunity. Just a human being who deserved basic dignity. Elena felt her cheeks warm. That's not special, Jonathan. That's just decent. In my world, decent is revolutionary. He leaned back in his chair. Do you have any idea how long it's been since someone offered to help me just because it was the right thing to do? No agenda, no networking opportunity, no expectation of anything in return. I can't imagine that's true. You must have friends, colleagues. Colleagues, yes. People who respect my business acumen, absolutely. But friends who see Jonathan Pierce the person instead of Jonathan Pierce the CEO. He shook his head. That list is shorter than you might think. Elena felt a flutter of something she couldn't quite name. Well, you have at least one now. The words hung between them, simple but loaded with possibility. Jonathan felt something shift in his chest, a warmth that had nothing to do with the coffee or the cozy cafe atmosphere. Elena, there's something I want to ask you, but I don't want you to feel pressured. Okay. Tomorrow, when we implement the Dignity First program at the Grand Meridian, I'm going to need someone who understands both the guest experience and the employee perspective. Someone who's seen discrimination from the ground level and knows how to fight it without destroying people in the process. Elena's eyes widened. You're offering me a job? I'm offering you a partnership. A chance to help design and implement real change in an industry that desperately needs it. Jonathan's voice grew passionate. Elena, you've been doing this work informally for months, standing up for guests, protecting employees, fighting for dignity one interaction at a time. What if we could scale that? What if we could turn your instincts into policy? Elena felt her heart racing. I don't have a business degree. I don't have experience with corporate programs or... You have something better. You have integrity, courage, and the kind of emotional intelligence that can't be taught in business school. Jonathan leaned forward. Elena, I've built a successful company, but tonight you taught me something I'd forgotten, that the most important qualifications for hospitality work aren't on any resume. Elena looked around the small cafe, thinking about Rosa's kindness, about Miguel's dreams, about the 3 years she'd spent watching small injustices and feeling powerless to change them. What would that look like? The partnership, I mean. It would mean working directly with me to develop training programs, traveling to our properties to implement changes, becoming the public face of everything we believe hospitality should be. Jonathan paused. It would also mean taking a significant pay increase and having the resources to really make a difference. Elena felt tears prick at her eyes. How significant? Significant enough that you could send your mother twice as much each month and still have more left over than you make now. The financial security was tempting, but Elena found herself thinking about something else entirely. Would I still get to work with guests directly? Every day if you wanted to. Elena was quiet for a long moment, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what Jonathan was offering. Not just a job, but a purpose. Not just financial stability, but the chance to honor Miguel's memory by making sure other families never felt dismissed or devalued. Can I think about it? Of course. But Elena, Jonathan's voice grew gentle. Whatever you decide, I want you to know that tonight changed something for me. You reminded me why I got into this business in the first place. That's worth more than any contract or acquisition. Elena felt warmth spread through her chest, but also a flutter of something deeper. Looking across the small table at Jonathan, this powerful man who'd been vulnerable enough to share his loneliness, generous enough to offer second chances to people who didn't deserve them, she realized she was in danger of feeling something that had nothing to do with business partnerships. Jonathan, she said softly, can I ask you something else? Anything. When all this is over, the acquisition, the program implementation, all of it, what will you do then? Jonathan considered the question. I haven't thought that far ahead. Why? Because I'm wondering if you'll remember to build that life your ex-wife talked about. The one that exists outside of work and success and proving people wrong. The observation was gentle but pointed, and Jonathan felt it land with surprising force. I don't know how, he admitted. It's been so long since I defined myself by anything other than achievement. Elena smiled, and Jonathan felt his breath catch at the warmth in her expression. Maybe that's something you could learn. If you wanted to. What do you think Elena should do? Take the leap into this new partnership, or stay with the security she knows? And is there something more than business developing between these two? Share your thoughts below. I love hearing your take on life-changing decisions. Elena's phone buzzed again, this time with an incoming call. The display showed Carmen, work, and Elena's face immediately tensed. I should take this, she said apologetically. Jonathan nodded, watching as Elena's expression grew increasingly troubled during the brief conversation conducted in rapid Spanish. ¿Qué pasó? ¿Cómo que interrogation? No, Carmen, no digas nada más hasta que. Está bien. Nos vemos mañana. She hung up, her hands visibly shaking. Elena, what's wrong? David didn't wait until tomorrow morning. Elena's voice was tight with controlled anger. He called in 3 of the night shift employees for what he's calling individual performance reviews, but Carmen says they're basically interrogations. He's asking detailed questions about every interaction they had with you, taking notes, making them sign statements. Jonathan felt cold fury wash over him. He's building a case to fire them. Worse, Carmen thinks he's trying to create documentation that shows they violated hotel policy by being unprofessionally familiar with a guest. Elena stood up abruptly, pacing to the window. Rosa, one of the housekeepers, smiled at you in the hallway. David is calling that inappropriate fraternization. This ends now, Jonathan said, reaching for his phone. Wait. Elena turned back to him, and Jonathan was surprised to see anger in her eyes, but not directed at David. Before you make any calls, I need to ask you something. Something in her tone made Jonathan pause. Of course. How long have you known you were buying the hotel? The question seemed to come from nowhere. I told you, 18 months of negotiations. No, how long have you known you were buying this hotel? The Grand Meridian specifically? Jonathan frowned. Elena, what does that have to? Just answer the question. 3 weeks. The location wasn't confirmed until the final negotiations. Jonathan studied her face, confused by the sudden shift in her demeanor. Elena, why are you asking this? Elena pulled out her phone and began scrolling through something. Carmen just told me something interesting. David received a call about an hour ago, not from corporate, from someone claiming to be conducting due diligence on staff behavior for an upcoming acquisition. Jonathan's stomach dropped. The caller specifically asked about any incidents involving discrimination complaints or guest relations issues in the past 6 months. Elena looked up from her phone, her dark eyes now blazing. Funny coincidence, don't you think? Elena, I can explain. Can you? Because right now it looks like you've been investigating this hotel's practices for weeks. It looks like you knew about David's history, about the patterns of discrimination, about everything. Her voice rose slightly. Did you come here tonight expecting to be treated badly? Jonathan felt the ground shifting beneath him. It's not what you think. Then what is it, Jonathan? Because right now I'm wondering if this entire evening has been some kind of elaborate test. Some corporate sting operation where I'm just collateral damage. Elena, no. That's not. Isn't it? Elena's voice cracked with betrayal. You just happened to show up at a hotel you're acquiring. You just happened to encounter exactly the kind of discrimination you built your business fighting against. And you just happened to find the one employee naive enough to follow you out into the street and spill her entire life story. Jonathan stood up, trying to approach her, but Elena backed away. How many other hotels have you done this to, Jonathan? How many other Elena Vasquezes have you collected along the way? Elena, listen to me. No, you listen to me. Her eyes filled with tears, but her voice remained steady. I told you about Miguel. I told you about my mother's medical bills, about my family's struggles, about everything I've never told anyone at work. I thought. She wiped at her eyes angrily. God, I actually thought this was real. Jonathan felt panic rising in his chest. It is real. Elena, everything we shared tonight. Is it? Because 3 hours ago you were a discriminated guest looking for coffee and conversation. Now suddenly you're offering me dream jobs and life-changing partnerships. Elena laughed bitterly. Let me guess, the timing is just a coincidence. Elena, please let me explain the due diligence process. The due diligence process? Elena stared at him in disbelief. Is that what you call it when you manipulate people into revealing their vulnerabilities? Jonathan felt everything spiraling out of control. That's not what happened. Elena, I swear to you, everything between us tonight has been genuine. Has it? Because I'm realizing I don't actually know you at all. I know the story you told me about your grandmother, about your marriage, about being lonely. Elena's voice grew cold. But I don't know if any of it's true, do I? The accusation hit Jonathan like a physical blow. How can you think that? Because 30 minutes ago you offered me a job that would solve every financial problem in my life, and now I find out you've been researching this hotel for weeks. You knew exactly what buttons to push, didn't you? Elena pulled on her coat, her movements sharp with hurt and anger. The grieving employee with the dead brother and the sick mother. What a perfect sob story to add authenticity to your corporate diversity program. Elena, stop. You're upset, and you're not thinking clearly. No, I'm thinking clearly for the first time tonight. She grabbed her purse. You want to know what the saddest part is? I actually believed you when you said you were lonely. I thought maybe, for once, I'd met someone who understood what it felt like to be judged by appearances. Jonathan reached for her arm. I do understand. Elena, everything I told you about my experiences, about facing discrimination. Elena pulled away from his touch. Do you? Because right now it seems like you've turned discrimination into a business opportunity. You've weaponized other people's pain for corporate profit. That's not fair. Fair? Elena's laugh was sharp and humorless. You know what's not fair? Making me believe that someone finally saw me as more than just a hotel employee. making me think that maybe, just maybe, I'd found someone who valued my opinion, my insights, my... Her voice broke slightly. My heart. The last words were barely audible, but they hit Jonathan with devastating force. He realized suddenly that somewhere in the evening's conversation, they'd both crossed a line neither had acknowledged. This wasn't just about business anymore, hadn't been for hours. Elena, my feelings for you have nothing to do with the acquisition. Your feelings? Elena stared at him. What feelings, Jonathan? The ones you developed during your market research? The ones that conveniently align with your staffing needs? Rosa appeared from behind the counter, clearly sensing the tension. To do bien mija? See, Rosa, I was just leaving. Elena headed for the door, then turned back one last time. You know what the worst part is? I was actually starting to fall for you. The man I thought you were. She paused at the door, her hand on the handle. Good luck with your acquisition, Mr. Pierce. I hope you find someone else to be the face of your corporate conscience. Elena, wait. But she was gone, disappearing into the night and leaving Jonathan standing in the small cafe with Rosa's worried eyes on him and the taste of ash in his mouth. His phone buzzed with a text from his legal counsel. Staff interviews complete. Documentation substantial. Recommend immediate termination of GM and 3 supervisors. Awaiting your authorization. Jonathan stared at the message, everything he'd worked for within his grasp. Justice delivered, discrimination punished, his business empire expanded with another successful acquisition. So why did victory feel like the most devastating loss he'd ever experienced? Rosa approached quietly, beginning to clear their table. She's a good girl, that one. Been coming here since she was 17, always helping others, always choosing kindness even when it costs her. Jonathan looked up. She thinks I used her. Did you? The question was simple, but it cut to the heart of everything. Had he? When he'd offered Elena the job, when he'd shared his loneliness, when he'd felt his walls coming down in response to her warmth, had any of it been manipulation? I don't know, he whispered, and realized that uncertainty was the most honest thing he'd said all night. Outside, the city continued its restless movement, but Jonathan Pierce sat alone in a small cafe, surrounded by the wreckage of something that might have been love, wondering if he'd just destroyed the first genuine connection he'd found in years. His phone buzzed again. Another message from his lawyer, another step closer to completing the acquisition. But all Jonathan could think about was the way Elena had looked at him when she'd said, I was actually starting to fall for you. And how that might have been the only moment of pure truth in an evening built on half-revelations and corporate strategy. Jonathan sat alone in the empty cafe for nearly an hour after Elena left, staring at his untouched coffee while Rosa quietly finished her closing routine. The elderly woman moved around him with the practiced grace of someone who'd witnessed countless late-night heartbreaks in her small establishment. Finally, she approached his table with a fresh cup of coffee and sat down across from him uninvited. You want to tell Rosa what happened, or you want to sit here feeling sorry for yourself until morning? Jonathan looked up, surprised by her directness. I think I just lost someone very important. Because you lied to her? Because I wasn't completely honest about why I was there. Jonathan ran his hands through his hair. My company has been researching the Grand Meridian for months. We knew about complaints, about management issues. But I swear, Rosa, when I walked into that lobby tonight, I wasn't expecting what happened. Rosa studied his face with shrewd eyes. But you were not surprised either, see? Jonathan was quiet for a long moment. No, I wasn't surprised. And the job you offered Elena is real. Every word of it was real. Jonathan's voice grew passionate. Rosa, she has insights about hospitality, about human dignity, that I've never encountered in 20 years of business. She could genuinely revolutionize how our industry treats both employees and guests. But, Jonathan sighed, but the timing makes it look calculated. Like I manipulated her emotions to get what I needed. Rosa sipped her coffee thoughtfully. Did you? I don't know. The admission felt like swallowing glass. When I offered her the job, was I thinking about her qualifications, or was I thinking about how much I wanted her to stay in my life? Both, maybe? Jonathan looked up sharply. What do you mean? Mijo, you think love and respect are separate things? You think wanting someone in your life means your admiration for their work is false. Rosa shook her head. Elena's brother, Miguel, he used to come here too. Beautiful boy, full of dreams. You know what he told me once? Jonathan shook his head. He said the best partnerships happen when you love someone's heart and respect their mind. When you want to build something together because you see the same vision. Rosa's eyes grew distant. Miguel, he was falling in love with a girl from culinary school right before he died. He said he knew she was the one because she made him want to be a better chef and a better man. Jonathan felt something twist in his chest. Elena doesn't trust my motives. Because you gave her reasons not to. Rosa's voice was gentle but firm. You had information you did not share. You let her think tonight was coincidence when it was not completely coincidence. But I didn't plan to meet her specifically. I didn't manipulate. No, but you were not fully honest either. Rosa reached across the table and patted his hand. Elena, she has been hurt before by powerful men who see her as useful instead of valuable. Her boss, other men who think a poor girl from an immigrant family should be grateful for any attention. Jonathan's stomach clenched. I'm not like them. No. Then prove it. How? Rosa stood up and began clearing their cups. That is for you to figure out, Mijo. But I tell you this. Elena Vasquez is not a woman you win back with grand gestures or expensive gifts. She is a woman you earn back with truth and time. After Rosa left him alone, Jonathan pulled out his phone and scrolled through his contacts until he found the number he needed. Marcus? Yeah, I know it's late. I need you to do something for me. 20 minutes later, Jonathan was walking through the empty streets toward the Grand Meridian, his mind racing with the conversation he needed to have. Not with Elena. That would come later if she'd let him. First, he needed to face David Hartley. The hotel lobby was nearly empty at 2 a.m., staffed only by a skeleton crew of night shift employees. Jonathan could see the exhaustion and worry in their faces, people who'd spent the evening being interrogated about basic human kindness. David emerged from the back office looking haggard, his earlier smugness replaced by the desperate energy of a man trying to control a situation that had spiraled far beyond his understanding. Mr. Pierce, thank God you're here. I've been conducting thorough interviews with all staff members who interacted with you tonight. I think you'll find our documentation shows. David, stop talking. The quiet authority in Jonathan's voice cut through David's nervous chatter like a blade. The lobby fell silent. I want you to call every employee you've interviewed tonight. Tell them to go home, with full pay for their shifts. Tell them they will not face any disciplinary action for treating a guest with basic human dignity. David's face went pale. Sir, I don't think you understand the complexities. I understand perfectly. Jonathan stepped closer, his voice dropping to a whisper that somehow carried more menace than shouting. What I don't understand is why you thought terrorizing your staff was an appropriate response to your own professional failure. Mr. Pierce, please, I was protecting the hotel's interests. You were protecting your own interests by sacrificing people who couldn't fight back. Jonathan's eyes were cold as winter. Do you have any idea what you've cost yourself tonight, David? David's confidence crumbled completely. Sir, what do you mean? Jonathan pulled out his phone and showed David a photo, Elena's picture with the Mexican-American family from 6 months ago. This family, Jonathan said quietly, wrote a letter to your corporate headquarters praising an employee who went above and beyond to make their children feel welcome. They specifically mentioned how one staff member's kindness turned a difficult stay into a treasured memory. David stared at the photo, recognition dawning with growing horror. Elena Vasquez has been doing your job better than you have for months. She's been building the kind of guest loyalty that creates lifetime customers. She's been training your staff by example in exactly the kind of hospitality excellence that my company values above all else. Jonathan put his phone away. And tonight, you tried to punish her for it. I didn't know. You didn't know because you never bothered to look beyond your own prejudices and assumptions. Jonathan's voice carried the weight of every slight he'd ever endured. Just like you didn't bother to see me as anything other than a threat to be eliminated. David was trembling now. Mr. Pierce, please, I have a family, children in college. So does Rosa from housekeeping. So does Carmen at the front desk. So does every person you terrorized tonight to cover for your own failures. Jonathan paused. But David, here's the thing. I'm not going to fire you. David's eyes widened in shock and desperate relief. I'm going to do something worse. I'm going to give you a choice. Jonathan walked to the lobby seating area and sat down, gesturing for David to follow. You can leave tonight with 6 months severance and a neutral reference. No questions asked, no admission of wrongdoing, just a quiet transition to whatever comes next. David nodded eagerly, but Jonathan held up a hand. Or, you can stay and participate in a comprehensive program designed to address the unconscious bias and discriminatory practices that led to tonight's events. Full psychological evaluation, bias training, mentorship with diversity experts, and 18 months of supervised probation. David's relief turned to confusion. What? The second option means keeping your job, David. But it also means acknowledging that you have a problem and committing to genuine change. It means apologizing personally to every employee you threatened tonight. It means working directly with Elena Vasquez to understand how your management style has created a hostile environment. Jonathan leaned forward. It means letting go of your ego and learning to become the leader your staff deserves. David was quiet for a long moment, the weight of the choice settling over him. Why? He asked finally. Why give me a second chance after what I did? Jonathan thought about Elena's words in the cafe, about Miguel's belief in the difference between justice and revenge. Because someone I respect very much reminded me tonight that people aren't born bigots, they learn to be, which means they can learn not to be if they really want to. He stood up, looking down at David's conflicted face. You have until morning to decide. But David, if you choose to stay, if you choose to change, it has to be real. Because I'll be watching. Elena will be watching. And if you revert to your old patterns, if you make any of your employees pay for your mistakes, then you'll discover that second chances don't come with third chances. Jonathan walked toward the elevator, then turned back one last time. Oh, and David? Elena Vasquez's performance review is overdue. I want it on my desk tomorrow, and it better reflect the exceptional employee she actually is. As the elevator doors closed, Jonathan caught a glimpse of David sitting alone in the empty lobby, a man forced to confront the choice between comfortable prejudice and difficult growth. But Jonathan's thoughts were already elsewhere, focused on a more important choice of his own. He pulled out his phone and began composing a text to Elena, then deleted it. Started over, deleted it again. How do you apologize for sins of omission? How do you prove that your feelings are real when your timing looks calculated? How do you earn back someone who'd started to fall for you when you'd given them every reason to doubt your truth? Jonathan stared at his phone's blank screen, knowing that the most important conversation of his life was still ahead of him, and that unlike his business dealings, there was no strategy that could guarantee the outcome he desperately wanted. Elena barely slept. She lay in her small studio apartment staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment of the evening. Jonathan's quiet dignity in the lobby, the warmth in his eyes when he talked about his grandmother, the way her heart had skipped when he'd offered her not just a job, but a partnership. And then the crushing realization that maybe none of it had been real. Her phone buzzed at 6 a.m. with a text from Carmen. David sent everyone home early with full pay. Says there won't be disciplinary action after all. What did you do? Elena stared at the message, her emotions churning. Even angry with Jonathan, she couldn't deny that his intervention had protected her co-workers. But did that make his earlier deception better or worse? At 6:45, she was getting ready for her shift when she heard a soft knock at her door. Through the peephole, she saw Jonathan standing in the hallway, still wearing his suit from the night before, looking like he hadn't slept either. Elena's first instinct was to pretend she wasn't home. Her second was to open the door and demand answers. She went with the second. How did you get my address? Employee records. I'm technically your boss now. Jonathan's voice was hoarse. Elena, please. I need 5 minutes to explain. There's nothing to explain. You had information you didn't share. You made me feel like... She stopped herself. You know what? It doesn't matter. It matters to me. Elena saw the exhaustion in his eyes, the genuine distress, and felt her anger waver slightly. Jonathan, I have to get to work. Actually, you don't. I've given all employees the day off with full pay while we transition management. Of course you have. Elena's voice was bitter. More corporate manipulation. Elena, please. 5 minutes. If you still want me to leave after that, I'll go and I won't bother you again. Against her better judgment, Elena stepped aside and let him in. Her apartment was tiny but immaculate. A small living area that doubled as bedroom, a kitchenette barely big enough for one person, and photographs of Miguel and her family covering every available surface. Jonathan looked around, taking in the modest space, the carefully tended plants on the windowsill, the textbooks stacked neatly on a desk that doubled as dining table. You're still taking classes, he observed. Business management. Night school. Elena crossed her arms defensively. I know you probably think. I think you're remarkable. Jonathan turned to face her. Elena, I came here to tell you the truth. All of it. Even the parts that make me look worse. Elena remained standing by the door, but she didn't ask him to leave. Pierce Hospitality Group has been researching the Grand Meridian acquisition for 6 months. During that research, we received 3 formal complaints about discriminatory practices, all filed against David Hartley specifically. Elena's stomach tightened, but she said nothing. We also received 7 letters of praise for exceptional service. 6 of them mentioned you by name. Elena's eyes widened. What? Jonathan pulled out his phone and showed her a series of emails. The Mexican-American family from 6 months ago. A elderly black couple who said you helped them when David tried to move them to a basement room. A young gay man who said you made him feel welcome when other staff members were clearly uncomfortable. Elena stared at the messages, her mind reeling. Elena, we weren't investigating you as part of due diligence. We were trying to figure out how you managed to create positive experiences in an environment that was systematically hostile to guests who didn't fit David's narrow definition of appropriate. So you knew. When you walked into that lobby last night, you knew what David was like. I knew he had complaints against him. I didn't know. Jonathan's voice grew quiet. I didn't know it would feel like that, to be dismissed so casually, so cruelly. I didn't know how much it would hurt, even when I expected it. Elena felt something shift in her chest. Jonathan, I also didn't know that I would meet someone who would change everything I thought I understood about courage, about integrity, about what it means to fight for what's right. Jonathan moved closer, his eyes never leaving hers. Elena, when I offered you that job, I wasn't thinking about business strategy or corporate needs. I was thinking about the fact that I'd found someone who shared my values, who understood what I was trying to build, who made me want to be better than I'd ever been. Elena's defenses began to crumble. But the timing was terrible. I should have told you about the acquisition from the beginning. I should have been completely transparent about everything. Jonathan's voice broke slightly. But Elena, I need you to understand, Nothing I felt for you was calculated. Nothing we shared was part of some corporate strategy. How can I believe that? Jonathan was quiet for a moment, then walked to her desk and picked up one of the framed photos. Miguel in his chef's whites, grinning at the camera. He looks like you. Same eyes, same smile. Jonathan, don't. When you talked about Miguel last night, about his dreams and his kindness and his belief in treating people with dignity, I felt like I was meeting someone I would have been honored to call a friend. Jonathan set the photo down carefully. That wasn't research, Elena. That wasn't manipulation. That was me recognizing something beautiful about your family, about who you are. Elena felt tears pricking at her eyes. And when you told me about the hospital, about watching your brother die while privileged families got better treatment, I saw myself in that waiting room. I saw every time I've been dismissed, every time I've been made to feel less than human because of how I look. Jonathan turned back to her, his own eyes bright with unshed tears. Elena, I've been successful for 20 years, but I've been lonely for most of them. Last night, sitting in that cafe with you, listening to you talk about your brother and your dreams and your mother, that was the first time in years that I felt like someone saw me. Not the CEO, not the success story, not the symbol of whatever I'm supposed to represent. Just me. Elena wiped at her eyes. That's not fair. What's not fair? Making me cry when I'm supposed to be angry with you. Jonathan smiled sadly. I'm not trying to manipulate your emotions, Elena. I'm just trying to tell you the truth. Elena walked to her small window, looking out at the city morning. The job offer, was that real? Every word. Elena, you have insights about hospitality that could revolutionize an entire industry. You have the kind of emotional intelligence and moral courage that can't be taught. Jonathan paused. But more than that, you have the ability to see people, really see them, and make them feel valued. That's not a skill I can use for business purposes. That's a gift I want in my life. Elena turned back to him. And if I said no? If I decided I couldn't trust you again? Jonathan felt his heart clench, but he kept his voice steady. Then I would respect that decision and leave you alone. Your happiness matters more to me than my own needs. The simple honesty of the statement hit Elena like a physical blow. This was what she'd been afraid of. Not that Jonathan was using her, but that she was falling for him so completely that his betrayal would destroy her. Jonathan, I need you to understand something. When Miguel died, I promised myself I would never let anyone have the power to hurt me that much again. I've spent 3 years building walls, keeping people at safe distances. I know, but last night, in that cafe, listening to you talk about your grandmother and your loneliness, those walls started coming down. I started imagining what it might be like to trust someone completely again. Elena's voice grew stronger. And then I found out you'd been less than completely honest with me, and it felt like every fear I'd ever had about opening my heart was being confirmed. Jonathan nodded, understanding the weight of what she was telling him. So here's what I need to know, Elena continued. If we're going to have any chance, as business partners, as friends, as whatever we might become, I need to know that you'll always tell me the truth. Even when it's complicated, even when the timing is bad, even when you think protecting me is more important than respecting me enough to let me make informed decisions. Elena, I swear to you. Let me finish. Elena held up her hand. I also need to know that if I take this job, if I take this leap, it's because you believe in my abilities, not because you're trying to keep me close. I won't be anyone's charity case or corporate trophy, no matter how good the intentions. Jonathan stepped closer, his voice intense with conviction. Elena Vasquez, you are the most competent, insightful, morally courageous person I've met in 20 years of business. If you take this job, you'll be doing me the favor, not the other way around. Elena studied his face, looking for any trace of insincerity. What she saw instead was a man who'd stripped away every pretense, who was standing before her as vulnerable and hopeful as she'd ever seen him. One more question. Anything. Last night, when you said you were lonely, was that true? Jonathan's smile was soft and real. Devastatingly true. But Elena, sitting here with you now, even after everything that's happened, even not knowing if you'll give me another chance, I don't feel lonely anymore. Elena felt the last of her defenses crumble. This man, this powerful, successful, complicated man, was offering her not just professional opportunity but emotional honesty. The kind of partnership Miguel would have understood, would have approved of. "Okay," she said quietly. "Okay. Okay, I'll take the job. I'll be your business partner." Elena paused, a small smile playing at her lips. "But I have conditions." Jonathan's face lit up with relief and joy. "Name them." "First, complete transparency from now on. About business, about personal feelings, about everything." "Done." "Second, I want to implement a memorial fund in Miguel's name, something that helps hospitality workers pursue education and career advancement." "Elena, that's beautiful." "Yes, absolutely." "Third," Elena stepped closer, her heart racing, "I want you to take me to dinner. Somewhere that's not about business or acquisitions or corporate strategy. Somewhere we can just be Jonathan and Elena, figuring out what this is between us." Jonathan felt his breath catch. "What do you think this is between us?" Elena reached up and touched his face gently. "I think it's the kind of unexpected love that Miguel always said was worth waiting for. The kind that sneaks up on you when you're not looking, with someone who sees your heart and respects your mind." Jonathan covered her hand with his. "Elena, are you sure? After everything, I'm sure that you're worth the risk. I'm sure that Miguel would have liked you. And I'm sure that sometimes the best partnerships begin with the scariest leaps of faith." Jonathan pulled her into his arms, and Elena felt the last 3 years of careful isolation melt away. This was what trust felt like, not the absence of fear, but the presence of something worth being brave for. "So," she said against his chest, "when do we start changing the hospitality industry?" Jonathan laughed, the sound rich with joy and possibility. "How about we start with changing each other's lives first?" Elena looked up at him, this man who'd walked into her world as a discriminated guest and revealed himself to be someone who could offer her everything she'd never dared dream of: professional fulfillment, financial security, and most unexpectedly, love. "Deal," she whispered, and kissed him with all the courage Miguel had taught her, all the hope Jonathan had reawakened, and all the love that sometimes comes disguised as justice, served at precisely the right moment to two people brave enough to recognize it. Outside, the city hummed with morning energy, unaware that in a small studio apartment, two hearts that had spent years building walls were finally tearing them down, brick by careful brick, in service of something beautiful and unexpected and utterly worth the risk. 6 months later, Elena stood in the lobby of the newly renovated Grand Meridian, watching as David Hartley, transformed by months of genuine education and supervised growth, warmly welcomed a family who a year ago he might have dismissed. The Dignity First program had become a model for the entire industry, and Elena had been featured on the cover of Hospitality Management magazine as the voice of conscious luxury. But more than professional success, Elena had found something she'd never expected: a partner who saw her completely, who challenged her to dream bigger while honoring the memory of the brother who'd taught her that love and respect were inseparable. As Jonathan emerged from the elevator, his face lighting up when he saw her, Elena knew Miguel would have approved. Some love stories begin with discrimination and end with justice. The best ones begin with courage and end with joy.